So I'm just sitting in my car in a parking lot, staring at my bank app. It's like 2:15 on a Tuesday, and my AC is doing this annoying rattling thing. But I've got the doors locked because I'm looking at a recurring charge for $129.99 from some hotel group in Chicago. Mark doesn't even go there for work anymore, hasn't for years. I had another phone in my cup holder, the one he doesn't know about. It was vibrating so hard against the plastic. It was basically humming. I didn't even pick it up because I already knew what it was. Just an alert from the GPS tracker I hid in his briefcase a few weeks ago. He wasn't at the office, he was at some Pilates place. Anyway, I finished paying the bill, shoved the burner phone in my purse, and went home. The house was a total disaster when I got back. The kids were losing it because the Wi-Fi was down, and Mark was just standing in the hall looking clueless. "Internet's out," he said. "Did you reset it?" "Yeah, didn't work." I didn't even answer him. I just walked into the pantry, unplugged the router, waited a bit, and plugged it back in. The lights turned green. "There," I said. "Fixed." I didn't even look at him. I went to get the mail and saw a notice that our insurance premium went up 20 for literally no reason. Just a random hike. I threw that on the counter next to the HOA notice. "We were late on those again." "Did you pay the HOA?" I asked. "I thought you did," he said. "I didn't. I emailed you the reminder on the 12th. I must have missed it." I just nodded. I wasn't even mad. I just put the papers in my Toto folder. It's where I keep the boring stuff, like utility bills and school forms. But there's a false bottom in there. That's where I keep the affidavits from my lawyer, Sarah. Honestly, for the last 6 months, I've just been waiting for the paperwork to clear. I'm not looking for some healing or whatever. I just want the money. I've been meeting Sarah in this depressing little office in a strip mall every Thursday, while I tell Mark I'm at my own Pilates class. We've been tracking every account and asset, just figuring out how to take everything he thinks he owns. But at home, I just act like the wife who's obsessed with the house. "Look at this," I said, pointing to a scuff on the wall. "The touch-up paint doesn't match, I think. It's the wrong batch of gray." Mark looked at it. "Looks the same to me, Becca." "It doesn't. It's way too beige. I'm going to have to go back to the paint store and get them to closer match it." "Who cares about the paint?" Because it looks sloppy," I said. Then I spent 3 hours on hold with the internet company. I was fighting over some 40 service fee they added to the bill. I just sat there listening to the hold music, while Mark walked around talking about his day. He told me about some client meeting and how exhausted he was. He told me he loved me. I stayed on the line. I didn't hang up until the rep apologized and gave me the credit. It wasn't even really about the money. I think I was just tired of getting screwed over by everyone. I'm just so over his lying that I don't even feel sad anymore. I just want his half of the house. A few days later, the doorbell camera battery died. It was around 6 p.m. on a Friday. I spent an hour on a ladder swapping the battery, pretending to be annoyed that the app was glitching. "This thing is junk," I told Mark when he walked in. "Battery died right when I wanted to see if the package was here." "Just get the wired one," he said. "I will, once I figure out where the wiring goes." While I was fixing the camera, I was actually deleting the cloud footage from the week before. I'd already saved the clips of some fancy silver car pulling into the driveway at 11 p.m. on a Tuesday. That was when I was supposedly visiting my mother. I had the timestamps and the plate. I even had a shot of the driver. It was my sister Claire. I saved the files to a drive and hid it in my jewelry box. The next week was the spring showcase at the kids' school. It's one of those things where parents dress up and drink lukewarm cider and pretend to care about finger paintings. I was wearing a navy dress and carrying some store-bought cupcakes I'd put on a plate to make them look homemade. Mark was across the gym talking to the principal. He looked happy. He looked like a great dad. He looked like a man who thought he had it all figured out. Then I saw Claire. She was by the bleachers in a dress that was a bit too tight for a school event. She was laughing at something, but she was scanning the room. When she saw Mark, she didn't wave. She just gave this tiny little nod, and Mark did it back. Just a quick tilt of the head. A signal. I walked over to them, balancing the cupcakes. The burner phone in my bag started buzzing again. Another location pin. "Hey Claire," I said. My voice felt totally flat. "I didn't know you were coming." Claire blinked. "Oh no, I had errands nearby, thought I'd pop in." "That's nice," I said. "Mark, did you tell her we were doing the cupcakes?" No, Mark said. He was smiling, but he shifted his weight. I didn't know she was coming either. I just looked at Claire, then back at Mark. I didn't say anything for a while. I stood there for a minute, holding the tray, while the kids were screaming in the background. You have a smudge of lipstick on your collar, Mark, I said. Mark reached up to touch his neck. Claire froze. Where? Right there, I said. I reached out and wiped a spot of red with my thumb. There was nothing there. I just made it up. I stepped back and smiled. Anyway, I need to check on the kids. Be right back. I turned around and walked away. As soon as I was out of sight, I pulled out my phone and texted Sarah. Sarah texted me back pretty fast, telling me to come by the office on Monday, and that she was bringing in a specialist. That's how I met James Rodriguez. He wasn't a lawyer, but a forensic accountant. He looked like a total government-drawn gray suit, thin tie, and a face that didn't really move when he talked. He didn't even do the whole handshake thing. He just opened a folder and slid a spreadsheet across the desk. He told me my husband was smarter than most people who cheat, but that he was exactly a mathematician. I looked at the numbers. There were these transfers, small ones. Nothing that would actually trigger a red flag on the main account. But they happened constantly. Every second Tuesday, 500 went to some company called JLM Consulting. I asked who JLM was, and James said they were still verifying that, but he pointed out the timing. The transfers started exactly 3 months after my sister, Claire, moved back to the state. He wasn't just paying for hotels. He was basically putting her on a payroll. I didn't even cry. I just felt this weird empty coldness in my chest. I just stared at the total at the bottom of the page and asked, how we get the money back? James leaned back and told me we wouldn't just get it back. We'd make sure Mark had nothing left to defend by the time he realized he was being sued. He told me to keep things totally normal. I had to be the wife who worried about HOA dues and paint colors. He warned me that if Mark suspected I knew about the money, he'd just move it offshore and then we'd be chasing ghosts. I had to let him think he was the smartest person in the room. I told him I could handle that. When I got home, I spent the afternoon fighting with the dishwasher. It was leaking from the bottom left and there was this lukewarm puddle of soapy water all over the linoleum. Mark, the dishwasher is leaking again, I yelled. Mark came jogging into the kitchen looking all concerned, like he actually gave a damn. He asked if it was happening again, and mentioned he thought the guy fixed it last month. I told him the guy didn't fix it. He just patched it. I was on my hands and knees with some old towels, just scrubbing the floor and complaining about paying $150 a visit for a job that didn't get done. It felt ridiculous. Mark said he'd call the guy tomorrow. He reached down to help, but I stepped back, telling him to just get the kids' backpacks ready for the next day, and that I had it. Once he was in the hallway, I reached under the sink and grabbed my folder. James had helped me set up some forged signatures for certain transfers. It wasn't exactly legal, but James said in high-asset divorces, the person who moves first wins. I needed Mark to sign some insurance updates, but they were actually authorizations for me to get into the joint brokerage account and move money into a trust for the kids. The next morning, I was just staring at the living room wall. I had a small container of agreeable gray paint and a tiny brush. Look at this, I said, not even turning around when Mark walked in. The light hits this spot and it looks totally beige. I told the store the batch was off, but they insisted the code was right. He told me it was just a wall and that no one even noticed. I notice it, I said. It looks sloppy. He told me I was obsessing over a shade of gray. And you're obsessing over your consulting work, I said. I tried to keep it casual, like I was just talking about the weather. Mark stopped. He asked what I meant. Nothing, I said, dabbing the paint. Just that you've been working so many late nights. Maybe you should take a weekend off. Invite Claire over for dinner? She's family. He didn't say anything for a few seconds. He just said maybe, that he'd check his calendar. He didn't actually check it. He just left for the office. As soon as his car left the driveway, I went into his office. I wasn't looking for love letters or any of that. I didn't even care about the emotional side of it anymore. I just wanted the JLM receipts. I found a ledger inside one of those hollowed-out fake books on the shelf, which honestly, who even does that? And it was just a list of expenses. Claire's apartment deposit, a lease on a white Lexus, a monthly stipend for administrative services, I took photos of every page and sent them to James. Later that afternoon, I spent 2 hours on the phone with our homeowner's insurance agent. I told him I didn't understand why the premium went up 20 when we hadn't added any riders or had a claim in years. The agent tried to explain some regional risk assessments, but I just kept interrupting him. I told him it didn't make sense, because my neighbor's rate was the same. I demanded a full audit and wanted to see the underwriting notes. I stayed on the phone until the agent sounded completely exhausted. I didn't actually care about the money. I just knew Mark checked the shared phone logs. If he saw a long call with the insurance company, he'd just think I was being annoying. He wouldn't think I was planning a financial strike with a forensic accountant. On Thursday, I met James at a diner. He had a calculator and a stack of papers. He told me Mark had started moving money out of the brokerage account in chunks of $9,000 to avoid federal reporting. That's kind of pathetic, I said. James said it wasn't pathetic. It was a trail. He told me we needed to manipulate him by creating a crisis something boring that made Mark feel like the provider and the problem solver. While he was distracted, we'd file the emergency motion to freeze the assets. I asked what kind of crisis, and he suggested something house-related, like the HOA threatening a lien over unpaid dues or a property tax issue. Something to make him panic. I waited for him in the driveway. When he pulled in, I was holding the HOA notice. "Mark, look at this," I said, trying to sound stressed. "The HOA is sending a final warning. They're talking about a lien if we don't pay the dues and late fees by Friday." "I thought you handled this." "What?" "I did," he said, looking confused. I told him well, they said he didn't, and there was a $400 late fee. I asked if the check bounced. He said that was impossible and that he remembered writing it. "Well, it didn't get there," I said. "I don't know what's going on with the accounts lately. Everything feels off. First the insurance, now this." He spent the next hour on the phone with the HOA management company, getting angry and arguing. He was so focused on the 400 that he didn't even notice me walk into the bedroom and take his laptop. I didn't have it for long. I just installed a keylogger James gave me. "I'm going to go start dinner," I said, walking past him. "Do we still have those frozen shrimp?" "Yeah, in the freezer," he said, still arguing with the rep. I can't believe these people. They're fucking idiots. I went into the kitchen and looked at the shrimp. I didn't feel sad or angry. I just felt this huge spike of adrenaline. I was finally cleaning up the mess. The next morning, my phone went off at 10:30 a.m. The Ring camera alert. Mark was at work. I opened the app and saw Claire. She had on these oversized sunglasses. She didn't ring the bell. She just stood there for a minute, then tucked a small manila envelope under the welcome mat and drove away. I waited 10 minutes before going outside to get it. Inside were keys to a storage unit and a note. It said she couldn't do it anymore, and that Mark was getting paranoid. He thought I knew, so he told her to move the files there. I didn't call or text her. I just put the keys in my purse and went back inside. I looked at the living room wall. The agreeable gray paint was finally dry. It looked fine. I called James. "I have the keys," I said. He told me to get the files. Once we had the physical evidence of the diverted funds, we wouldn't just freeze the accounts, we'd go for the total buyout. He said Mark would be lucky if he kept his car. I hung up. I went to the pantry and saw the Wi-Fi router was blinking orange again. "Damn it," I said. I spent the next 45 minutes on hold with the internet provider, listening to the same hold music for the third time this month. I didn't really mind, though. I just sat there in the quiet house, looking at the keys in my hand. So I just drove straight to the storage unit. It was in one of those gross industrial parks that always smells like old tires and damp cardboard. I didn't even park right, basically, just left my car sideways across the loading zone, because I was freaking out. The unit was tiny, maybe 5 by 5. When I rolled up the door, it just smelled like dust. There was one plastic bin sitting right in the middle of the floor. I knelt down, popped the lid, and it was just folders everywhere. I started with the JLM files, thinking it would be more of the same, hotel receipts or payments for the Lexus. But then I found this blue folder. I spent a few minutes staring at these wire transfers before it even clicked. They weren't going to Claire. They were going to an account for Emily C. Bell, my mother. I didn't even have a big breakdown. I couldn't breathe for a second. Like my chest just locked up, and I couldn't get a full breath for a minute. I just stared at the dates. These payments to my mom started 2 years before the ones to Claire. And they were way bigger too. $5,000 a month. Every single month it said family loan repayment. But I don't remember any loan. My mom's been on a pension and Social Security for like 10 years. So what the hell was that? I just sat there on the concrete floor, looking at the numbers, and felt kind of sick. Not even heartbroken, just actual nausea. It was wild realizing the two people I actually trusted had been doing this right under my nose. Anyway, I packed the bin back up, locked the unit, and went home. When I got inside, the house was a disaster. The kids were fighting over the dog, and Mark was in the kitchen, digging through cabinets. He asked me where the extra trash bags were, and I just told him they were under the sink. My voice sounded off like I was talking from another room or something. He asked if I'd sorted things out with the insurance agent, and I just told him the audit was still happening and walked past him. For the next couple of weeks, I basically became a cleaning freak. I just started scrubbing everything and obsessing over the house just to keep from screaming. I spent way too much time fixing the washing machine and fighting with the lawn company over a few weeds, just because I needed something to focus on. The next morning, I met James at a coffee shop. He was midway through this messy breakfast sandwich, barely looking up when I told him about my mom. He just shrugged and pushed some papers across the table. "Here's the deal," James said, talking around a mouthful of food. "I've been digging into that JLM consulting shell company. Mark didn't just use it for Claire and your mom. He used it to create a paper trail of losses." I didn't really get it. "What do you mean losses?" Look at these red numbers," he said. "He's recording investments into overseas ventures that don't even exist. He's basically trying to make it look like the joint money is just evaporating." "Why?" "Because if the money is gone in a bad investment, you can't claim half of it in a divorce," James explained. "He's prepping a fake bankruptcy. He's making up evidence, so when you finally file, there's nothing left to take." I looked at the spreadsheets. The losses were almost $400,000, so the payments to Claire and my mom. "Those are real," James said. "But the losses are a total joke. He's stealing from the joint account, paying them, and then writing it off as a business failure to hide it from you." I felt that coldness again. He wasn't just lying, he was a straight-up fraud. He'd spent years building this fake ledger. "Can we prove it?" I asked. "Already did," James said. "I tracked the overseas accounts. They aren't in the Caymans or wherever. They're just different accounts in his own name, at a few credit unions in different states. He didn't move the money out. He just moved it sideways." I leaned back. "How do we hit him?" James smiled, and it wasn't a friendly look. "We don't tell him. Not yet. We let him keep losing money so he thinks the trail is working then. We file for an emergency freeze on everything including the hidden accounts. And we file a fraud claim. If you can prove he intentionally wasted marital assets, the judge can give you a much higher percentage. We aren't looking for 50 anymore. We're looking for 80. I didn't even think about it. Do it. While Mark was at the mailbox a few days later, I called my mother. "Hi, honey," Emily answered. She sounded way too cheerful, which was honestly disgusting. "Hi, Mom. I was looking at some old bank statements and saw some transfers from Mark family loan agreement." "What's that?" There was a long pause. I could hear her breathing. "Oh, that," she said, her voice totally changing. "Mark and we just had a little arrangement. He wanted to help me out, and I didn't want to worry you. You know how you get stressed." "Help you with what, Mom?" "Just expenses." "Because life is expensive. He's a good man. He's been very generous." "How much, Mom?" "I don't remember the exact amount," she said. "Why are you asking this now? Are you two fighting?" "No," I said, "we're fine. I just wanted to know." I hung up. I didn't feel sad. I just felt like I was looking at a bug under a microscope. My mother had been taking a monthly bribe, or maybe she just liked the money. Either way, she was just another part of the legal strategy now. The next few weeks were just a blur of boring stuff and me scrubbing every inch of the house. On Wednesday, James texted me. "The freeze is set. Motion filed. He'll find out in an hour." I was in the living room with a microfiber cloth and some glass cleaner, polishing the baseboards. Mark's phone started buzzing on the coffee table. Then his iPad, then an email on his laptop. He picked up the phone and didn't say anything for a long time. I could see his face go pale, then red, then this weird gray color. "What is this?" he asked. His voice was shaking. I didn't stop scrubbing. What's what? My accounts are frozen, he said. Everything, the brokerage, the savings, even my personal checking. There's a legal hold on all of them. I finally stopped and looked up at him. I stayed on my knees, just looking up from the floor. That's strange, I said. Maybe it's a glitch? A glitch, Bika, this is a court order. Who filed this? I stood up slowly. I didn't yell. I just looked at him. I did, I said. Mark stared at me. What are you talking about? Why? I found the JLM files, Mark. I found the transfers to Claire, and the payments to my mother. Mark's jaw dropped. He actually stepped back and hit the edge of the sofa. I can explain that the money. It was an investment. The losses were fake, I interrupted. James found the credit unions, the sideways accounts. You tried to manufacture a bankruptcy to screw me out of my half. That's fraud, Mark. He looked like he was about to say something, but I just held up my hand. Don't, I said. Don't do the I love you thing or the it was for us thing. I'm just done. Mark looked at the floor, then back at me. He looked completely broken, but not because he lost me, because he'd lost the money. He looked like he wanted to scream, but he just didn't have the energy. He just stood there in the middle of the room, holding his frozen phone. I walked over to the kitchen counter, picked up a piece of mail, and walked out of the room, leaving him there. Mark didn't move for a while. He stood there staring at the phone in his hand. I went into the kitchen and started unloading the dishwasher. I could hear him breathing behind Meth's heavy, ragged sound, but I didn't turn around. I kept putting the plates away. Bika, he said. Look, we can talk about this. We can figure it out without the courts. I put a stack of bowls on the shelf and finally looked at him. The courts are already involved, Mark. The papers are filed, and everything's frozen. There isn't any figuring it out anymore. There's just the settlement. The settlement? He asked. What settlement? You can't just freeze everything. I have bills. I have a business to run. You had a business, I told him. Now you have a forensic accountant and a fraud claim. I'd worry more about the credit unions than the bills right now. But he tried to step toward me, but I stepped back and pointed to the door. I think you should go stay at a hotel, or maybe Claire has a spare room. Actually, the car is probably frozen too, right? He didn't say anything. He walked out of the kitchen, and I heard his suitcase dragging across the hardwood. He didn't even fight me on it. He just left. As soon as the door clicked shut, I sat down at the table and opened my laptop. A notification from my security camera popped up about the battery being low. I stared at the screen for a minute. I didn't really feel like celebrating. I felt like I had a really long to-do list. The next morning, I was back in Jameis' office. He had a new set of folders, and this look on his face like he'd already won. The freeze worked, James said. Mark tried to move about $12,000. The second he got the notification, but the hold hit the accounts 3 minutes before he could click confirm. He's basically broke. What about the 80? I asked. We're in a good spot, James said, since we can prove he intentionally moved marital assets into hidden accounts and then lied about losses to commit fraud. We're arguing wasteful dissipation. Basically, he tried to steal from the marriage. Judges hate that. We aren't just asking for the house and the main accounts. We're asking for a massive offset. He'll be lucky if he walks away with his clothes and a used Honda. I looked at the numbers. Between the fake losses, the payments to Claire, and the money he'd sent to my mother, it was nearly $700,000. What about my mother? I asked. James leaned back. She's a witness or a co-conspirator, depending on how we play it. If she wants to keep that money, she's going to have to testify that Mark gave it to her as a gift. But even then, it's still a marital asset he spent without your consent. Either way, the money comes out of his share. I didn't say anything. I thought about my mother's voice on the phone, telling me how expensive life had become. I spent the rest of that afternoon fighting with the internet company. I'd noticed a random $40 service convenience fee on my latest bill, and it rubbed me the wrong way. I spent 3 hours on hold, listening to that same upbeat corporate jazz over and over. When I finally got a human, a guy named Kevin, he tried to tell me the fee was mandatory for paperless billing updates. That makes no sense, I told him. I've had paperless billing for 5 years. Why is there a charge now? It's just a system update, ma'am, Kevin said. I don't care about the system update, I said. I want the $40 credited back, or I want to speak to your supervisor. I stayed on the line for another 40 minutes. I didn't really care about the $40. But I was in a mood and I wanted the win. By the time Kevin agreed to waive the fee, I felt a weird sense of calm. On Tuesday, Claire called me. I let it go to voicemail, then listened to it. She sounded panicked. She was asking why her credit cards were being declined, and if Mark had told me something. She sounded like she was about to cry. I called her back 10 minutes later. "Hi, Claire," I said. Oh my God, what is happening? My cards aren't working and Mark isn't answering his phone. Is everything okay? No, it's not, I said. I found the storage unit, Claire. I found the JLM files. There was a long silence. Look, Claire said, her voice shifting. She sounded defensive now. Mark and we have a connection. He wanted to make sure I was taken care of because our family is such a mess. I didn't think you'd mind. I don't mind, Claire, I said. I just think it's interesting that you thought it was okay to live off my husband's diverted assets. For 2 years, James me accounted us all the records. Every hotel, every lease payment. The car. What do you want from me? She asked. Look, you can sign a statement admitting the money came from our joint accounts, or I can just let my lawyer go after you for fraud. Your choice. You're threatening me, she asked. I'm offering you a deal, I said. You sign the paper, and I stop caring about you. That's the best deal you're going to get. I hung up. I didn't feel a rush, it felt like checking a box. That evening, I was in the hallway trying to get the Wi-Fi router to work. The signal was dropping in the bedrooms, and the kids were yelling that they couldn't do their homework. Mark had probably messed with the settings before he left. Or maybe it was just old. I was crouching on the floor, resetting the modem for the 4th time, when my phone buzzed. It was my mother. Bika, honey. I heard from Mark that things are complicated, she said. They are, Mom, I said. He's being sued for fraud. Now let's not use words like that, she said. He was just trying to be helpful. I'm sure if you just sat down with him and had a nice talk. I'm not having a nice talk with a man who stole nearly $1 million from our family to pay for his mistress and your expenses, I said. I didn't ask him to. It doesn't matter if you asked, I interrupted. The money is gone from the accounts, and the court wants it back. I've already told James about the transfers to you. You can either return the funds to the trust, or you can be named in the lawsuit. You would sue your own mother, she asked. She sounded wounded. I'm not suing you, Mom. I'm recovering marital assets. There's a difference. You have until Friday to let me know if you're going to cooperate. I hung up. I finally got the router to blink green, and the kids stopped yelling. I sat there on the floor, leaning against the wall, looking at the baseboards. I noticed a small scuff mark near the door. The next week was just a bunch of meetings. James and the lawyers handled the heavy lifting. Mark's lawyer tried to call me 3 times, but I told them to go through Sarah. They tried the emotional appeal route first, sending emails about how Mark was devastated and wanted to make things right for the kids. Just send the signed settlement, I told Sarah. I don't want to read his emails. The settlement was brutal. Mark kept his personal car, the beat-up one he used for site visits, and a small percentage of his 401k. I got the house, the primary brokerage accounts, the kids' trust, and a massive lump sum as a penalty. He basically walked away with nothing but his professional license and a lot of debt. The day the papers were finalized, I was in the living room with a small container of gray paint and a tiny brush. I was touching up a spot where Mark had bumped the wall with his suitcase when he left. He came over to pick up the last of his things. He looked terrible. He'd lost weight and his skin looked sallow. He was carrying a single cardboard box of books and some old trophies. I can't believe you did this, he said. He wasn't yelling, he just sounded exhausted. You wiped me out. I have nothing. I didn't look up from the wall. You had plenty when you were paying for Claire's apartment, Mark. You just didn't think I'd notice. I loved you, he said. I stopped dabbing the paint and looked at him. I mean, look at the evidence. Mark, you spent years building a fake company to hide money from me. You paid my mother to keep a secret. You tried to manufacture a bankruptcy to leave me with nothing. That's not how this works. He didn't say anything. He stood there for a minute, looking around the living room. The house looks good, he said. The paint is finally the right shade, I said. He turned and walked out the front door. I heard the car start and then drive away. I went back to the wall and finished the touch-up. Once the paint was wet, I stepped back to look at it. It looked fine. I went into the kitchen and saw a notice from the Hoa, complaining that my grass was too long in the backyard. I sighed and walked to the garage to get the mower. I spent the next hour cutting the grass in straight lines. When I was done, I went inside, took off my shoes, and sat down at the table with a glass of water. The house was quiet. I opened my laptop and logged into the bank account. I looked at the combined balance of the trust and the recovered assets. I didn't feel any rush of victory. I just felt like things were finally in order. I noticed an email from the insurance company. The audit was complete, and they were refunding me $112 for an overcharge from the previous year. I clicked accept and closed the laptop. I looked at the kids' half-finished school projects on the counter and realized I still had to help them finish their posters before tomorrow. I just sat there for a second, staring at the mess, and then I got up to find the glue.